Rain hit the front windows like impatient knuckles, turning the streetlights outside into smeared gold. Inside the obsidian room, weather did not exist. The air was warm and dry, heavy with aged leather, truffle oil, and the faint metallic bite of fear that clung to the back of the tongue. Margot Reed adjusted her apron and tried not to wince. The stiff fabric scraped the bruise on her hip, a souvenir from slamming into a subway turnstile that morning when she was too tired to lift her leg high enough. 24 years old. 2 doubles this week, $42 in her account. The kind of math that made your chest tighten for no reason at all. She was not supposed to be on the floor tonight. She was a back waitress, the invisible one who polished glasses until her hands smelled like lemon sanitizer, who ran bread baskets and refilled water without anyone learning her name. But 10 minutes before shift, Sarah had called in sick with a convenient fever, and Henri had looked at Margot like a man choosing which plank to throw into a fire. He found her near the service station and grabbed her arm. His fingers were damp, digging in. "Listen to me," Henri hissed, his voice pitched low but sharp enough to cut. He was small, twitchy, a man whose nerves lived on the outside of his skin. "Table 9 is reserved. If he comes in, you do not speak unless spoken to. You pour. You take the order. You vanish. Do you understand?" Margot's eyes flicked past him. A couple at table 4 waved an empty wine glass like a threat. Someone in the corner snapped their fingers, impatient. She swallowed the reflex to snap back. "Who is he?" she asked, distracted, already reaching for a fresh bottle of Pinot. Henri's mouth tightened. He leaned closer, as if the name itself could crawl out into the room and kill them. "Silas Mercer," he whispered. The syllables landed like a cold coin on her tongue. Even Margot, living in her broke, exhausted bubble, knew the Mercer name. Half the shipping yards, 3/4 of the politicians. Charity galas with their last name engraved on the ice sculptures, headlines that called them investors, sidewalk whispers that called them undertakers. Henri's grip tightened once, then released like he'd burned himself. "Do not linger at 9, he said, "and never look him in the eye." Margot pulled her arm free, smoothing the apron as if it could smooth out her pulse. "Got it," she said, forcing lightness into her voice. "Don't poke the bear." Henri didn't smile. At 8:15, the atmosphere shifted in a way Margot felt before she heard. It was not a sound. It was a vacuum. Conversations at other tables softened, then died. Forks paused halfway to mouths. Even the jazz trio at the far end of the room seemed to play quieter, like the notes were afraid to exist. The heavy oak doors opened. 2 men entered first, broad shoulders under cheap suits, eyes sweeping the room like security cameras. Their gazes did not rest. They scanned, catalogued, moved on. Then the man between them stepped through. Silas Mercer looked less like a gangster and more like a ghost story in a 3-piece suit. He was tall, charcoal fabric fitted to him like it had been poured on. His hair was dark and swept back, not a strand out of place. His face was calm in the way a knife was calm. His eyes, when they lifted briefly, were the color of a frozen river. He did not walk so much as glide. Margot's throat tightened, not from fear alone but from the sudden pressure of a room full of people silently praying they would not be noticed. Silas sat at table 9 without checking if the chair was pulled out. One of the men moved to the bar and took a position that turned his body into a wall. The other lingered near the entrance, hand tucked inside his jacket, where politeness ended. Henri appeared at Margot's shoulder like a man haunted. "Water," he mouthed. No sound, just a command. Margot reached for the crystal pitcher. Her fingers were steady from years of carrying fragile things while pretending nothing could break. She took a breath that tasted like truffle and money and something sour underneath. Then she stepped out onto the floor. She felt every eye on her back as she crossed the room. Not staring, not exactly, but watching in the way people watched a slow-moving accident. At table 9, Silas's attention was on his phone. The screen threw a pale light across his knuckles. He did not look up when Margot stopped beside him. "Good evening," Margot said, keeping her voice level. "Still? Or sparkling?" Silas did not respond. He tapped his finger on the linen tablecloth. Tap, tap. The sound was soft, but it landed like a slap. Margot waited a beat, then another. A familiar heat rose behind her ribs. Not fear, annoyance, the kind that came from being treated like furniture for too long. "Sir," she said again, a shade louder. Silas's thumb stopped moving over his phone. Slowly, he lifted his head. When his eyes met hers, the air around Margot seemed to drop 10 degrees. It was not rage, she saw. It was a clinical curiosity, like a scientist noticing a bug on a microscope slide and deciding whether it was worth crushing. "I didn't order you to speak," Silas said. His voice was low, smooth, controlled, velvet over ice. "I tapped for water," he added, eyes steady. "That means you pour." Margot's jaw flexed. Her feet hurt. Her back ached. Her body carried weeks of bills and hours and swallowed words. The room behind her felt like a wall of silence pressing in. "I'm not a mind reader," she said, before she could stop herself. "And I don't respond to tapping. I'm a waitress, not a dog." The sentence hung in the air like smoke. Somewhere behind her, a glass clinked against a table too hard. Someone drew in a sharp breath. The jazz trio missed a beat. Henri, visible through the crack of the kitchen door, went pale. His mouth opened, closed, opened again, like he was trying to swallow a scream. Silas stared at Margot for a long 5 seconds. Then he tilted his head slightly. "What is your name?" he asked. "Margot," she said, keeping her chin up because lowering it felt like losing something she could not afford to lose. Silas leaned back in his chair. A faint smirk touched one corner of his mouth, the kind that didn't warm his eyes. "Well, Margot," he said, "you seem to be under the impression your dignity matters here." His gaze dropped, not to her face, but to her apron, her hands, the cheap fabric and small signs that screamed working class. "It doesn't," he finished. "You are here to serve. Now, pour the water." He gestured to the empty glass with a flick of his wrist, casual and dismissive, as if he were waving away a fly. Margot's fingers tightened around the pitcher handle. For a second, she was back in a hospital corridor that smelled like bleach and stale coffee, holding a paper cup, while a nurse spoke too fast about medication her mother needed and money she didn't have. She saw a stack of envelopes on her kitchen counter. She saw her reflection in the microwave door, exhausted and invisible. The tank was empty. Her hands shook, not with fear, but with rage so bright it made her vision sharpen. She tipped the pitcher, aiming for the glass. The arc of water glittered under the chandelier, and then, whether from a tremor in her grip or the tiniest shift of the pitcher's weight, the stream missed. Ice-cold water cascaded over the rim, splashing onto the cuff of Silas's suit, soaking into the leather of his shoes. It was an ordinary sound, water hitting fabric. In that room, it sounded like a death sentence being signed. The entire restaurant gasped in one breath. One of the men at the bar took a step forward, his hand sliding inside his jacket. Margot went still. Silas looked down at his wet shoe. Then he looked back up at her. His expression was unreadable. I tripped," Margot said, lying on instinct. Her voice trembled now, finally catching up to what she'd done. Silas stood slowly, unfolding to his full height. The distance between them shrank. until Margot could smell his cologne beneath the leather and truffle, expensive and sharp. He reached into his jacket pocket. Margot flinched, bracing for metal. Instead, he pulled out a crisp, white handkerchief. He dabbed his cuff with deliberate care, never breaking eye contact. "Leave the bottle," he said. No raised voice, no threat, just a command, calm enough to be terrifying. Margot's fingers released the pitcher like it had turned hot. It clattered softly on the table. She backed away one step, then another, keeping her movements slow because sudden movements felt like an invitation. Silas watched her as if committing her face to memory. Henri's voice cracked from the kitchen doorway. "Back. Now." Margot turned and bolted. Her shoes slid on the polished floor. Her breath tore in and out of her chest. She hit the swinging kitchen doors and shoved through into the heat and hiss of the line. Henri was there, his face purple, eyes bulging. "Get out," he rasped. "Out the back. Don't clock out. Don't say goodbye. Run." Margot didn't argue. Her hands felt numb. She grabbed her coat from the hook like it belonged to someone else and pushed through the back exit into the alley. Rain hit her immediately, cold and hard, soaking her hair, plastering fabric to skin. The air smelled like garbage and wet asphalt. Somewhere behind her, the muffled hum of the restaurant continued as if nothing had happened. Margot ran anyway. Each step came with the same thought, pounding in time with her heartbeat. She had just humiliated Silas Mercer, and men like him did not forget. The city did not calm down after a mistake like that. It only waited. For 3 days, Margot moved as if every shadow had teeth. She took the long way home, cut through crowded streets, ducked into bodegas when a dark SUV crawled too slowly at the curb. Her phone stayed clenched in her palm, even when it wasn't ringing. Every time a car door slammed, her shoulders jumped. Every time footsteps sped up behind her, she forced herself not to run, because running made you memorable. At night, the radiator in her studio hissed like a warning. The rain kept tapping at the window. Tap, tap. The sound worked its way under her skin. On Friday morning, her bank balance slipped into negatives. The number sat on the screen like an accusation. Rent was due. Mr. Henderson had already left a voicemail that sounded cheerful in the way predators sounded cheerful. By late afternoon, she pulled on her work shoes again. The laces felt too tight. The air outside tasted like cold metal. She told herself she was only going to collect her final paycheck. She told herself she would keep her head down. She told herself a lot of things. The back entrance of the obsidian room was a narrow metal door in a brick wall, slick with rain. When she pushed it open, warm air hit her face. Garlic, butter, sanitizer, too normal for what her body expected. The kitchen was quiet, not dinner rush quiet. Empty quiet. The burners were off. No pans hissed. No knives chopped. A single prep light buzzed overhead, casting everything in flat, unforgiving white. Even the floor looked clean in a way that felt wrong. "Henri," Margot called, her voice small in the tile and steel echo. A door clicked. Henri stepped out of his office. For a second, she didn't recognize him. His posture was different. His shoulders were higher, like someone had finally tightened the strings holding him together. A new watch sat on his wrist, catching the prep light every time he moved. His usual sheen of anxious sweat was gone. He looked at her with something that wasn't anger. Pity, maybe. Confusion. Like he couldn't decide if she was brave or already dead. "You're not fired," Henri said. Margot stopped. The words didn't fit. Her throat tightened. "I spilled water on Silas Mercer." Henri's mouth twitched. It wasn't a smile. "I know. I insulted him." she pressed, because if she didn't name it, it felt like it could be undone. Henri's gaze flicked past her shoulder toward the corridor that led to the dining room, as if the walls themselves could hear. Then he lowered his voice. He requested you. The phrase landed with the weight of a hand on the back of her neck. Margot's stomach rolled. Requested me for what? Henri reached into a drawer and pulled out a freshly pressed apron. Not the stiff, stained thing she usually wore. This one was crisp, white, sharp at the folds, like it was meant for a different person. He held it out as if handing her a verdict. Tonight, he said, Table 9, 8 o'clock. He specified you. Exclusive. The fluorescent light hummed. Somewhere deep in the building, a refrigerator kicked on with a low, steady thrum. Margot's fingers didn't move to take the apron. The rational part of her brain tried to build a ladder out of the moment. She could walk away. She could quit. She could run. Then her mind supplied the cost in cold numbers. Rent, food, Metro card, the folder of bills on her kitchen counter. The hearing she'd been postponing. Toby's name on paperwork she couldn't afford to make real. Running required money. Quitting was its own kind of cliff. Henri's voice softened, but his eyes stayed hard. Whatever you do tonight, he said, just give him what he wants. I don't want blood on my floor. Margot finally took the apron. The fabric was smooth between her fingers, too clean, like it hadn't earned the right to be worn. She tied it around her waist anyway. Tour. At 8 o'clock sharp, the dining room filled with that same unnatural hush, as if someone had sucked the air out through a straw. Margot stood near the service station, heart hammering against her ribs, and watched the heavy oak doors open. Silas Mercer walked in alone. No bodyguards. No entourage. That was worse. A navy suit this time, darker than the room's shadows, sharp enough to cut. His left cuff sat perfectly. His shoes gleamed. No sign of Tuesday's water. No sign of damage. No sign that anything touched him without permission. He moved to table 9, sat, and placed a black leather notebook on the linen. The sound was soft, controlled, a statement without volume. Margot's mouth went dry. She stepped forward with a practiced steadiness that felt like acting. Her hands wanted to shake, so she clasped them behind her back and forced her shoulders down. "Good evening, Mr. Mercer," she said, each word measured. "Would you like still or sparkling?" Silas looked up. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth, thin, not kind, the expression of a cat that had already decided how the mouse would die. "Margot," he said, tasting the name like it belonged to him now. "No water tonight," he continued. "Whiskey. Macallan, 25. "Yes, sir." She turned before her face could betray her. Her shoes sounded too loud on the polished floor. The bar shelves glittered with bottles like a wall of trapped amber. Her fingers found the right one. Her hands did not drop it. That felt like luck. When she returned, she placed the glass on the table with care. Ice didn't clink because there was none. The whiskey sat dark and still. Silas didn't touch it immediately. He looked at her like he was weighing something invisible. "Sit," he said. Margot froze. "I can't sit with customers," she replied, and hated how small her voice sounded. "It's policy." Silas's gaze slid past her, toward Henri's anxious silhouette near the kitchen door. "I own the building," Silas said calmly. "I bought it this morning. Policy is whatever I say it is." He tapped the chair opposite him with 2 fingers. Tap, tap. Margot's pulse spiked, but her feet moved anyway. Henri gave a tiny nod that looked like a man surrendering. The chair felt too heavy when she pulled it out. The linen was too white. The room's attention tightened like a noose around her throat as she sat across from Silas Mercer. Up close, he looked younger than the headlines. Early 30s, maybe. There were faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the kind exhaustion carved into people who never slept deeply. His gaze stayed steady, clinical, but not sloppy. Everything about him felt controlled, like he could choose what parts of himself the world was allowed to see. Margot forced air into her lungs. "Why am I here?" she asked. Silas lifted the whiskey and took a slow sip. His throat moved once. He set the glass down without a sound. "If I wanted you dead," he said, voice low. Margot's fingers tightened around the edge of the table, hidden beneath the linen. Silas watched the tiny movement, the way her knuckles went pale, the way she didn't flinch away from his eyes. Then he leaned back slightly, as if settling in. "I'm curious," he said. "About what?" "Fear." His eyes didn't blink. "Everyone in this city fears me. The mayor fears me. My father fears me." He paused, letting the words hang, letting the room absorb them without anyone daring to react. "But you," he continued, "you were shaking, and you still corrected me." Margot's jaw clenched, her heart hammered. Her instincts screamed at her to lie, to flatter, to be small. Instead, she stared at him and let the truth sit on her tongue like a coin. "Because being scared doesn't pay rent," she said. Silas's gaze sharpened, the faintest shift, like a blade turning to catch light. For a moment, the obsidian room felt very far away, as if the tablecloth and the dim chandeliers had sealed them inside a private box. Silas's hand moved toward his jacket pocket. Margot's breath caught too fast, too loud in her ears, but when his fingers emerged, there was no gun, only a matte black card, with no numbers, no name, just a silver signature that looked like a threat, written in ink. He slid it across the table toward her with 2 fingers, and the air around Margot tightened, not from fear alone, but from the sick recognition that lifelines and traps often came packaged the same way. The card sat between them like a blade laid flat on linen. Margot didn't touch it. Not yet. Her eyes stayed on Silas's face, searching for the punchline that never came. The room around them kept breathing in careful, controlled little sips. Glassware clinked too softly. A chair creaked, and then went still, as if even wood was trying to be invisible. Silas's gaze never wavered. He looked almost bored, but there was something sharpened beneath it, attention disguised as indifference. Margot reached out and hooked the edge of the card with a fingertip, pulling it closer as if it might bite. The surface was cool, perfectly smooth. No numbers, no limits written in ink, just his signature in metallic silver. A flourish that felt like a claim. "I need a dinner companion," Silas said, voice low enough to be private, but not soft. "Eating alone is tedious." Margot's laugh came out as a short exhale. "And I'm what? A rented chair." Silas's mouth barely moved. "You're a choice." The word landed wrong in her chest, because it wasn't kindness. It was leverage, dressed up as generosity. "And if I refuse?" Margot asked, keeping her tone flat. "What happens?" Silas lifted his whiskey again. A slow sip. His eyes stayed on hers the whole time, like he was measuring how long it took her to flinch. "You go back to pouring water," he said, "and I go back to destroying the lives of people who annoy me." He said it lightly. That was the worst part. Like it was weather. Like it wasn't personal. Margot's fingers tightened around the card. Her mind flashed to Toby's file folder, the kind of paperwork that made you feel trapped by ink. Then it flashed to rent, to hunger, to the hard math of survival. She slid the card into her apron pocket anyway. "I'm ordering lobster," she said. Something in Silas's eyes glinted amusement. "Maybe. Approval. Maybe. Either way, it didn't warm him. Good choice. For a moment, it almost felt normal. Plates arrived. Butter shone under soft lighting. The smell of lemon and salt filled the space between them. Silas asked her a question about a book she'd mentioned without thinking, and she answered without realizing she'd started breathing again. Then the heavy oak doors slammed open. The sound cracked through the room like a snapped bone. A man stormed in, leather jacket soaked from rain, a scar cutting down his cheek like a seam. His eyes locked on table 9, the way a dog locked on meat. "Mercer!" he shouted. Silas didn't turn his head quickly. He turned it slowly, as if time belonged to him. "Lev," he said, voice calm, almost amused. "You're interrupting my date." Lev's mouth twisted. His gaze flicked to Margot with open contempt. "You're scraping the bottom." Lev sneered. Silas's right hand drifted to the steak knife resting beside his plate. He didn't lift it. He just laid his fingers on the handle, casual, like a man touching a familiar tool. "Go home," Silas said, "before you do something you can't undo." Lev spit the words out fast, furious. Message from the Moretti family. His hand went inside his jacket. Everything that happened next was too fast to belong to human bodies. Silas didn't wait to see if it was paper or metal. He rose in one smooth, violent motion, flipped the heavy oak table sideways as if it weighed nothing. Porcelain and crystal exploded across the floor. Margot's world tilted. She saw white plates turn into spinning moons. Silas's arm hooked around her waist. He yanked her hard, throwing her behind the overturned table. Her back hit the floorboards. Dust and splinters puffed up into her mouth. Bang! A gunshot shattered the mirror behind the bar. Glass rained like icy confetti. Margot screamed and clamped her hands over her head. Her cheek pressed against the floor. It smelled like lemon polish and something older beneath it. "Stay down," Silas commanded. His voice didn't shake. It cut. Margot's eyes flashed upward. He was half crouched, shoulders squared, a sleek silver pistol already in his hand. She hadn't seen him draw it. She only saw the result, like magic done by a man who didn't believe in miracles. "I thought this was a dinner date," she yelled, voice ragged, ears ringing. "It is," Silas said, and fired twice. 2 sharp cracks, 2 bursts of light, then a heavy thud that made the floor vibrate. Lev went down with a strangled sound, clutching his shoulder. But the front doors swung open again. 2 more men charged in, ski masks, dark clothing. Their guns looked like extensions of their arms. "Kitchen," Silas snapped. He grabbed Margot's wrist. His grip was iron. He hauled her up so fast her feet barely found the floor. They sprinted toward the swinging double doors. A bullet splintered the frame inches from Margot's head. Wood chips sprayed into her hair. She stumbled, throat tight, but Silas yanked her forward and shoved her through into the kitchen. Heat hit her face. The hiss of unattended pans. A burner still on. Scallops smoking in a forgotten pool of butter. The kitchen staff had vanished as if the walls had swallowed them. Henri was curled inside the walk-in refrigerator. Door cracked just enough for terrified eyes to shine out. Silas didn't even look at him. "Back exit," he ordered. They ran past stainless counters and hanging ladles, their footsteps slick on greasy tile. The back door was a dark rectangle ahead. Then it exploded inward. A 4th man stepped through. Shotgun raised, barrel aimed straight at them. Margot froze. The air in her lungs turned to stone. Silas didn't slow down. He snatched a cast-iron skillet off a burner still smoking, still angry hot, and hurled it like a discus. The skillet slammed into the gunman's face with a crunch that made Margot's stomach flip. The man toppled. The shotgun clattered and skidded across the tile. "Don't look," Silas barked, shoving Margot forward. She didn't look. She couldn't stop the sound from crawling into her bones. Silas kicked the shotgun under a prep table, then slammed the metal back door open. Rain hit them like a wall. The alley was a river of trash and oil. Water poured off dumpsters and down cracked brick like tears. Headlights reflected in puddles, as if the ground was watching. A black Audi waited by the dumpster, parked crooked and illegal. It looked too clean for this alley, too expensive to belong anywhere honest. Silas fumbled for keys, but his hand was slick. Blood. Margot saw it then, a dark stain spreading across his sleeve. "You're hit," she gasped. "Grazed," he grunted, unlocking the car with shaking fingers. "Get in." Margot's feet didn't move fast enough. Her mind snagged on the word kidnapping, on the thought of police, on every true crime story she'd ever avoided. "I can't, this is—" Silas yanked the passenger door open and shoved her inside, hard enough that the leather seat caught her breath. "This is survival," he said, slamming the door. "They saw your face. You're a witness. If you stay here, you're dead." The logic was cold. It fit. Silas vaulted into the driver's seat. The engine ignited with a low snarl. The kitchen door burst open behind them. Bullets sparked off wet pavement. Silas slammed the Audi into reverse, spinning the wheel. Tires screamed on slick asphalt. The car fishtailed, then caught traction and shot down the alley like it was being dragged by a hook. They burst onto the main street, barely missing a taxi. A horn blared. Someone shouted. The city kept moving, oblivious to the war spilling into its arteries. Margot's hands clawed at the dashboard. Her knuckles went white. "Who are they?" she yelled, voice shredded by wind and panic. "Who tries to kill someone over dinner?" Silas's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. A heavy SUV barreled through traffic behind them, headlights blinding, grille looming like a predator's jaw. "The Moretti family," Silas said, voice terrifyingly calm. Old rivals. Rain streaked across the windshield in frantic lines. The wipers couldn't keep up. "Did you start this?" Margot shouted. Silas took a sharp left. The force slammed her against the door. Her shoulder hit hard, pain bright. "I don't start truces," he said. "I end them." The SUV followed, clipping a parked car with a shriek of metal. Sparks flashed. Silas's jaw tightened. Blood dripped onto the gear shift. "Hang on," he warned. "I am hanging on." "No," he said, and his hand cut the headlights. Darkness swallowed them. Margot's stomach dropped. "What are you doing?" "You'll kill us." "Disappearing," Silas said. He yanked the handbrake. The Audi spun 180 degrees on wet pavement, tires screaming, their world rotating into a blur of streetlights and rain. For a heartbeat, they were facing the oncoming SUV, its headlights like twin suns. Margot couldn't breathe. Then Silas gunned the engine in reverse, the car sliding backward with controlled violence, and shot down a narrow service ramp tucked between concrete barriers. Lower Wacker Drive opened beneath them like a mouth. The SUV roared past above, missing the turn. The sound faded into the storm. Down here, the tunnel swallowed light. Concrete pillars flashed by like ribs. The engine's purr echoed against damp walls. They were invisible. Silas didn't turn the headlights back on until they were deep enough that the city felt like a rumor. Only then did he exhale, a long, shaking breath that fogged the inside of the windshield. Margot turned her head toward him. His face was pale under the dashboard glow. Blood streaked his sleeve and dotted the gear shift like dark ink. "You're bleeding a lot," she said, voice suddenly small. "I've had worse," Silas muttered, eyes fixed ahead. Margot opened it with trembling fingers. Inside sat a cheap flip phone and a loaded Glock. Her breath caught. The gun looked heavier than it should, like it pulled gravity toward it. She grabbed the phone instead, holding it up as if it could save them. "Who do I call?" she asked. Silas glanced at the screen and his eyes narrowed. "Nobody," he said. The phone was dead. He slammed his palm on the steering wheel, pain flashing across his face. Damn it. Margot stared at the dead phone, at the gun she hadn't touched, at the tunnel stretching ahead like a vein. Silas's voice cut through the ringing in her ears. "We can't go to my penthouse. They'll watch it. We can't go to my father. He'll ask questions." His eyes flicked to her, colder again, but tired underneath. "I have a safe house," he said. "Nobody knows it. Not even my crew." The words should have been comforting. Instead, Margot felt her stomach tighten, because in a world like his, "nobody knows" was never a permanent condition. Silas pressed the accelerator. The Audi surged toward the faint glow of an exit ahead. "You wanted to know about my world," he said, voice low, almost flat. "You're about to see the only part of it that's actually mine." The safe house wasn't a house. It was a loft perched on the top floor of a dead textile factory, the kind of building the city had forgotten and the rain had claimed. The elevator was busted, so they climbed. By the third flight, Silas's breath had a tight edge to it. By the fifth, he gripped the railing hard enough to leave a smear of blood on the chipped paint. Margot kept one step behind him, watching the way his shoulder held itself stiff, guarded like the muscle didn't want to admit it was injured. At the sixth floor, a steel door waited at the end of the corridor. No welcome mat, no peephole, just a keypad and a camera lens that looked black and blind. Silas punched in a code with his good hand. The lock clicked. The door swung inward. Margot expected cold, chrome, and empty luxury. Instead, warmth met her first old books, dust, faint piano polish. Exposed brick ran along the walls. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held worn spines that looked touched often, not staged. A grand piano sat in the corner under a gray dust sheet, like a sleeping animal. A velvet sofa sagged with age in the middle of the space, and a single lamp cast amber light onto a coffee table scarred with use. Silas stumbled to the kitchen island and dropped onto a stool, jaw clenched. "First aid kit," he rasped, nodding toward a cabinet above the sink. "And whiskey. Any bottle." Margot moved before she could think too hard about why she was still here. Her hands worked on autopilot, cabinet, latch, pull. The kit wasn't a pharmacy box. It was a trauma pack. Sealed pouches, curved needle, thread, sterile gauze. The kind of equipment that assumed you had seen blood before. A bottle of bourbon sat on the counter like it belonged to another life. Margot set everything down. The plastic packaging crinkled too loudly in the quiet loft. Silas tried to shrug off his suit jacket. The fabric stuck to the wound. His breath hissed through his teeth. "I need you to help me," he said. "I'm a waitress," Margot shot back, voice sharper than she felt. "Not a doctor." "I don't need a doctor," Silas said, eyes narrowed with pain. He looked up then, and the look was different, still dangerous, but stripped raw at the edges. "Please." The word sounded wrong coming from him, like a lock clicking open that had never been used. Margot swallowed. The loft felt too quiet. The rain ticked against the windows. Somewhere in the building, pipes groaned like an animal shifting in sleep. "This is going to hurt," she said. "Just do it." She tore open the trauma pack. The sterile smell hit her clean, sharp, hospital adjacent. Her stomach twisted anyway. Scissors slid through fabric. Expensive navy cloth parted with a soft rip that felt obscene. Underneath, the wound was ugly, an angry furrow carved across his left shoulder, bleeding slow but steady. Not arterial, not clean. The bullet had kissed him and kept moving, leaving damage like a warning. Margot grabbed the bourbon bottle and poured. The alcohol splashed onto torn flesh. Silas's head snapped back, throat tightening. He didn't scream. He didn't let the sound out. But his fingers clamped on the granite edge so hard the stone creaked under pressure. Jesus, Margot whispered, more to herself than him. Needle, Silas said, voice strained. Thread. Margot stared at the curved needle like it was a weapon. I can't sew a person. Silas's eyes cut to hers. Sweat beaded at his temple. His mouth curved into something that might have been a smirk if his face wasn't so pale. It's just like mending a hem, he said. Just skin. Margot's hands trembled. She hated that he saw it. I'm sorry, she murmured, threading the needle anyway. Talk, Silas said, eyes squeezing shut. Distract me. Margot pressed the needle into skin. Silas flinched once, hard. His nostrils flared. The muscles in his jaw jumped. Margot forced her breath to stay even. Pierce. Pull. Tighten. Again. The motion was sickeningly familiar in its rhythm, like folding napkins or tying apron strings, only this time it was flesh. What do you want me to say? She asked, voice shaking as she drew the thread through. Your brother, Silas ground out. You said he depends on you. Why? The question hit like a bruise. Her focus wavered, and she had to steady her hand against his shoulder, warm, solid, alive. His name is Toby, Margot said, pushing the needle through again. He's 19. But he's not really 19. Silas's breath came out in a harsh exhale. Developmental delay, Margot continued. The words tasted like shame she didn't deserve. He got tricked last year. Some kids convinced him to hold a backpack while they robbed a store. Cops found him with it. They charged him as an accomplice. The thread pulled tight. Silas's fingers dug into the granite again. And the system ate him, Margot said, voice thinner now. A tear slid down her cheek. She wiped it with her shoulder, leaving a damp smear on her sleeve. He's in a state holding facility. It's a hellhole. They steal his food. He doesn't understand why he can't come home. Silas's eyes opened. The coldness in them shifted, not into softness, but into something darker recognition. Maybe. Calculation. Maybe. The kind that could be mercy or cruelty, depending on the day. Margot tied the last knot with shaking fingers and snipped the thread. Done, she said, and stepped back as if distance could protect her. Silas rolled his shoulder carefully. Pain flashed across his face, then vanished behind control. He grabbed the bourbon and took a long swig. Color crept back into his cheeks. Margot turned to the sink and scrubbed her hands under hot water until the red spiraled away. The drain gurgled like it was swallowing a secret. Behind her, Silas's footsteps were quiet on the concrete floor. He moved to the massive window overlooking the industrial skyline, rain smearing the city into a gray blur beyond the glass. I can get him out, Silas said. Margot froze with her hands still dripping. The faucet kept running. She turned it off slowly. Don't, she said. Don't joke about that. Silas didn't look at her. His reflection in the window looked like a man carved out of night. I never joke about business, he replied. He turned then, and the loft's warm lamplight cut across the hard angles of his face. One phone call, Silas said. Charges dropped. Record expunged. Private care facility. Paid. 10 years. Margot's chest tightened so hard she thought she might choke. The offer was everything she'd begged the universe for in quieter, uglier moments, which meant it couldn't be free. Margot's voice came out steady, only because she forced it. What's the catch? Silas walked toward her, slow and deliberate. The Moretti family thinks my side is unstable, he said. Too violent. They want a truce. They don't trust me. He stopped a few feet away, close enough that Margot could smell bourbon on his breath, sharp and sweet. To secure the deal, Silas continued, I need to prove I'm looking toward a legitimate future. Margot's stomach turned. Silas's eyes stayed on hers. I told Victor Moretti I was engaged to a civilian, he said. A woman with no ties. Someone who grounds me. The loft felt suddenly colder. Margot's mouth went dry. You lied, she managed. It was a strategic projection, Silas corrected. But now they've seen you. They saw me save you. They saw me leave with you. He held up a hand, palm outward, not quite calming, not quite surrender. In their minds, he said. No, Margot said immediately, stepping back. Her heel hit the base of the cabinet with a dull knock. Absolutely not. Silas's gaze didn't soften. If you walk out that door, he said, they will find you. And if they think you're my weakness, they'll use you. Margot's mind snapped to Toby. Confused, hungry, waiting. The thought made her skin crawl. Silas watched her face as if reading the exact moment fear turned into fury. I put you in this position, he said quietly, and now I'm offering you a way out. He reached into his pocket and pulled something small and dark, a folded document, edges crisp. A contract, Silas said. Margot stared at it. Pulse pounding. 6 months, he went on. You live with me. You wear my ring. You attend dinners, galas. You play the part. In exchange, Toby is free. Your debts are paid. Margot's throat tightened. And after 6 months? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. Silas's eyes didn't blink. We stage a breakup, he said. I give you enough money to disappear. Anywhere. You never see me again. The offer sat between them like a loaded gun. Margot's hands curled into fists at her sides. Her voice came out stronger. And if I refuse? Silas's expression didn't change. Only his tone shifted, still calm, but edged. Then you go back to pouring water, he said. And I go back to doing what I do. Margot stared at him, rage and dread twisting together. 6 months, she said slowly, testing the words. 6 months, and you don't touch me, Margot said, the line drawn like chalk on a floor. No sleeping together. No romance behind closed doors. This is business. Silas's mouth twitched. Margot, he said, almost amused. I don't force women. The pause that followed was razor thin. And frankly, he added, you're too loud to be my type. Good, Margot snapped. Silas extended his hand. Large, calloused, clean. Margot looked at it like it was a trap and a lifeline at the same time. Somewhere in her mind, Toby's face flickered, lost, frightened. Margot swallowed once and stepped forward. Deal, she said. Their hands met. Warm skin, firm grip, and then a red laser dot appeared on Silas's chest, dead center over his heart. Margot saw it first. Her blood turned to ice. Down! She screamed, slamming into him. They hit the rug hard. A beat later, the window exploded inward, glass erupting like a storm, as a sniper round tore through the space where Silas had been standing. Shards rained onto velvet, onto skin. Margot's breath came out as a gasp, her face inches from his. She could feel his heartbeat pounding against her palm. I thought you said nobody knew, she hissed, voice shaking with fury. Silas's eyes were dark now. No exhaustion, no softness, only rage sharpened into purpose. Someone did. His jaw clenched. "There's a rat," he growled. Then he looked at Margot, and the words came out like a verdict. "The deal just changed," Silas said. "We aren't hiding anymore." Silas drove like the city was trying to swallow them. Northbound streets blurred into dark glass and wet asphalt. The rain thinned, then returned in sudden sheets, each burst turning the windshield into a shimmering wall. Margot kept her hands in her lap because she didn't trust them not to shake. Tiny cuts from the shattered window stung along her knuckles, and every time she flexed her fingers, she felt grit, glass dust lodged under skin. Silas's shoulder bled through the fresh bandage. The white gauze was turning pink again, then darker, the stain spreading in slow, ugly petals. He didn't look at it. He didn't look at her either. His gaze stayed pinned to the road, like the road was a problem he could solve. The gates appeared out of the rain like teeth, iron bars, tall and black, crowned with spikes that glistened under security lights. A camera lens tracked the Audi as it rolled up. The intercom crackled once, a small electronic cough. Silas didn't speak into it. He simply lifted his hand and held it toward the lens, palm forward, a ring catching the light. A beat. The gates parted with a low mechanical groan. SFX. The motor whined, steady and expensive, like the sound of money moving. The driveway stretched long and pale, flanked by trees that looked like silhouettes cut from paper. Gargoyles crouched on stone ledges, mouths open as if mid-scream. The mansion at the end rose out of the fogged darkness, gothic and enormous, a fortress wearing a house's face. Men stepped out of the shadows as the car approached. Assault rifles angled down, but ready. Their eyes moved from Silas to Margot with practiced indifference, the way people looked at cargo. Silas rolled past them without slowing. The tires whispered on wet gravel. The front doors opened before they reached the steps. A butler waited inside, perfectly still. The entryway smelled of old wood and cold marble, with cigar smoke lingering like a ghost. The warmth was subtle, controlled, as if the house didn't believe in comfort. "Your father is in the library," the butler said, his eyes flicking to the blood at Silas's shoulder, and then away, like he hadn't seen it. "He is expecting you." Margot's throat tightened. Expecting. Not surprised. Not alarmed. Expecting. Silas's hand found hers. His grip was warm, firm, grounding in a way she hated needing. She looked down at their joined hands and felt the absurdity of it, her still smelling faintly of bourbon and kitchen soap, holding the hand of a man who lived behind gates and guns. "Ready?" Silas asked. "No," Margot said. He nodded once, as if that answer was acceptable. "Then don't hesitate," he replied. "Hesitation is what they eat." They moved through halls that swallowed sound. Rugs, muted footsteps, wall sconces cast soft pools of light that never reached the corners. Portraits lined the walls, men in dark suits with eyes that didn't smile, the kind of faces that belonged to history books and police files. The library doors were heavy, dark wood, brass handles worn by generations of hands. Silas pushed them open. Heat from a fireplace brushed Margot's skin. The room smelled of old paper and cigar smoke, and something faintly medicinal, like menthol, rubbed into joints. Elias Mercer sat near the fire in a wheelchair, a blanket draped over his legs. He looked fragile until his eyes lifted. Two black beads, sharp and alert, missing nothing. Behind him stood Roman. He looked like a softer version of Silas, prettier, almost, with a mouth that knew how to smile. And he was smiling now, wide and polished. The kind of smile that belonged in a campaign ad. Margot remembered Silas's warning on the drive. He smiles too much. Elias's gaze moved first to Silas's shoulder. You're bleeding on my Persian rug, Elias croaked. Silas didn't glance down. We were hit, he said. There's a leak. Roman stepped forward, hands spread, in theatrical concern. A leak, he echoed, eyebrows lifting. His eyes flicked briefly to Margot, then back to Silas. Or did you just get careless, brother? Silas's jaw tightened. His hand squeezed Margot's once, a subtle pressure that said, stay steady. Elias's eyes drifted to Margot. They traveled slowly, deliberately, cheap boots, damp hair, the tiny cuts on her hands, the stubborn set of her chin. The look felt like being inspected for flaws. And who is this? Elias asked, voice rasping like gravel. Silas pulled Margot half a step forward. Not gentle, not rough, presenting. This, he said, his tone hardening into something formal, is Margot, my fiancée. The word hit the room like a stone dropped into still water. Roman's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, so fast most people would miss it. Margot didn't. She caught it the way she caught the twitch in a customer's jaw before they complained about a steak. Elias didn't react immediately. He just stared. Silence stretched thin. Fiancé, Elias repeated. Silas's face didn't change. His lie was smooth enough to be dangerous, since I realized I needed something to live for other than money. Roman let out a short laugh, sharp and disbelieving. It died quickly when Elias lifted a hand. Elias rolled his chair forward with a slow whir. The small motor sounded like a quiet threat. He stopped inches from Margot's knees. Up close, Elias smelled like cigar smoke and old cologne, layered over something faintly sour, like medication. He tilted his head. She looks like a stray cat. Elias grunted. What is your father's name, girl? Margot felt Silas's body go still beside her. She understood the test immediately. If she looked at Silas for help, she failed. If she lied poorly, she failed. If she softened, they'd taste it. Her heartbeat thudded once, heavy. She lifted her chin and met Elias's eyes. My father was a drunk named Frank, Margot said evenly. He died in a gutter. Roman's brows shot up, the smile gone now, replaced by bright surprise. Margot didn't stop. She kept her voice flat, controlled. The way she spoke to customers who tried to talk down to her. I made myself, she continued. I don't need a lineage to know my worth, Mr. Mercer. Silas's fingers tightened around hers, imperceptible approval, a pulse of warmth that was not comfort, exactly more like respect. Elias stared at her for a long moment. The fire popped in the hearth. SFX. A log shifted and cracked, loud in the quiet. Then Elias chuckled. It sounded like dry leaves crumbling. Frank, Elias mused. Honest. I like honest. Roman's mouth twitched, trying to recover its charming shape. Elias snapped his gaze to Roman. Get her a drink. Roman's smile returned, but it was thinner now. Yes, father, Roman said, and turned toward a sideboard where crystal decanters glowed amber in the firelight. Elias's eyes went back to Silas. Get patched up, he ordered. If she's going to be a Mercer, she can't look like she rolled out of a dumpster. Margot's cheeks burned, but she didn't look away. Elias continued, voice sharpening. The Solstice Gala is tomorrow night, he said. We announce the engagement there. Silas stiffened. That's too public. It's necessary, Elias snapped. The softness gone. If you hide, you look weak. If you look weak, the Moretus attack. Elias's gaze flicked to Margot again, as if weighing her like a weapon. You will attend, he said. She will attend. Roman poured a drink with careful hands, but his eyes kept sliding to Margot's face, measuring, remembering. Elias leaned back slightly, satisfied. And we will see, he added, voice low. Who flinches? Margot felt the words settle cold in her stomach. Tomorrow. A ballroom full of predators, cameras, politics, crime disguised as charity. Silas's hand stayed around hers, steady and possessive in the same motion. Margot didn't let her face change. But inside, something clicked into place. This wasn't just a house. It was a pit. And the moment she stepped into it, every smile in the room would be watching for blood. The next 24 hours moved like a controlled storm. Margot was lifted out of her wet clothes and into a guest wing that felt larger than her entire block. Warm light, thick carpets, a bathroom that smelled like eucalyptus and expensive soap. People came and went without names, eyes down, voices minimal. They scrubbed rain and fear off her skin, pinned her hair up, painted her mouth the color of fresh blood. They slid silk over her shoulders as if dressing a statue. When she caught her reflection, she didn't recognize it. Emerald fabric clung to her like a second skin. The slit rose high enough to be a warning. A diamond necklace lay cold at her collarbone, heavy as a promise. She flexed her fingers and saw the tiny cuts from glass, now cleaned and covered with clear balm. They still stung. Proof she hadn't dreamed any of it. She stared at herself until the mirror stopped looking like a stranger and started looking like armor. A knock sounded at the door. Silas entered without waiting for permission. Black tuxedo, arm in a sling that matched the suit's darkness. His face was set, controlled, but his eyes paused on her for a fraction too long. His throat moved once. "You look," he began, then seemed to hate the softness in the word forming. He cleared his throat. "Adequate." Margot's mouth tugged. Silas stepped closer. The air shifted with him, like the room adjusted to his gravity. He reached up with his good hand and adjusted the necklace clasp at the back of her neck. His fingertips brushed her skin, light but precise. Margot's shoulders tensed before she could stop it. Silas noticed. His hand dropped. "Tonight is the end game," he said, voice lower now. "The Morettas will be there to sign the truce. The rat will be there to stop it." He slid something small into her palm. A compact mirror. Silver. Elegant. "Open it," he said. Margot snapped it open. Instead of powder, a razor-thin ceramic blade rested inside, pale and innocent-looking. It didn't gleam like metal. It looked like a secret. "If anyone tries to take you out of the ballroom," Silas said, eyes hard, "you use this. Aim for the neck. Do you understand?" Margot closed the compact. Click. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. "I understand," she said, surprised to hear her voice steady. Silas nodded once. Approval, without warmth. Then he offered his arm. The drive into the city felt unreal. The Mercer convoy moved like a dark animal through traffic. When they arrived at the Palmer House Hotel, lights spilled out onto the street in gold sheets. Paparazzi flashes popped like tiny explosions. The entrance swarmed with suits, gowns, security earpieces, smiles that didn't reach eyes. Margot looped her hand around Silas's good arm and walked into the flash storm. The grand ballroom was obscene, wealth turned into architecture. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen galaxies, gold leaf curled along the ceiling. The air smelled of perfume, champagne, and money heated by too many bodies. Politicians laughed too loudly. Judges sipped too slowly. Men Margot had only seen on billboards stood shoulder to shoulder with men who looked like they belonged in police reports. It was impossible to tell which was which. Silas leaned close, his mouth near her ear, without touching her. "Don't smile too much," he murmured, Boredom is power. Margot let her face settle into something calm and distant, the kind of expression that said she had nothing to prove and nothing to lose. It was a lie. She wore it anyway. They moved through the crowd. Hands reached. Introductions landed on her like tags. Senator, CEO, philanthropist. Margot laughed at the right moments, touched Silas's sleeve possessively when cameras drifted close, played the part so smoothly it scared her. Across the room, a cluster of men stood near the bar like statues carved from granite. The Morettis. Victor Moretti was broad and heavy, white beard trimmed, eyes bright with patience that looked like brutality in disguise. At his side hovered his son, sharper, younger, gaze scanning. Silas's voice dropped. There they are. Margot's pulse quickened, but she didn't tighten her grip. She held her posture as if she belonged among wolves. They approached. Victor's gaze flicked to Margot and lingered. His smile was thin. Silas, Victor rumbled. And the famous fiancé. Silas nodded. Victor, this is Margot, Silas said. Victor took her hand and kissed it. His lips were cold. You have unique taste, Victor said, eyes on Silas. She seems very alive. I like things that fight back, Silas replied. Dry. Victor's mouth twitched as if amused. Or warning. We are ready to sign, Victor said, glancing toward a private room adjacent to the ballroom. Midnight. No weapons. Just us. I'll be there, Silas said. As the Morettis peeled away, Margot's stomach tightened with a waitress's instinct, the premonition that something was about to go wrong. She didn't know how she knew. She just felt the air shift. A subtle wrongness, like a table setting missing a fork. She leaned toward Silas. Did you see the waiter? She whispered. Silas's eyes narrowed slightly. Which one? The one near the Morettis with the champagne tray. Margot's gaze tracked him without staring. He's not looking at the glasses. He's watching your brother. Silas stiffened. Across the ballroom, Roman stood near the orchestra, laughing with a stunning blonde, his tux impeccable, his posture effortless. His smile was in place, perfect as a photograph. Too perfect. Silas's jaw flexed. Roman is useless, he muttered. But he's not suicidal. Margot's mind raced. Her palms stayed dry. Her body felt strangely calm, as if adrenaline had burned past fear and landed in focus. Maybe he's not betting against the family, she said, eyes still following the waiter. Maybe he's betting against you. The orchestra swelled into a waltz. Silas's voice cut in. Dance with me. He didn't ask. He moved. His hand found her waist, firm and practiced, and guided her onto the floor, as if the dance was camouflage and command in one. They spun among couples under chandeliers. Silas's face stayed composed, but his eyes kept scanning over her shoulder. Margot forced her breathing to match the music. Slow in, slow out, smile, minimal. You're good at this, she murmured, more to fill the silence than to flatter. I had lessons, Silas said. Focus. Tell me what you see. Margot let the room rotate around them. The waiter slipped away from the Morettis' orbit, moving toward the private room. His tray stayed balanced. His left hand dipped into his pocket. He pulled out a small gray object, flat and unremarkable. Margot's gaze sharpened. The waiter approached the private room door and touched the gray object to the handle. A faint dusting of pale powder clung to the brass like flour. Margot's stomach dropped. The handle, she hissed. He's putting something on it. Silas's body went rigid for half a beat. Then he pivoted them smoothly, using a turn to angle his view. Jammer, Silas murmured, voice flat. Or poison. It's dust, Margot said, eyes narrowing as she stared hard. Contact. Silas's eyes flicked to her. A question without words. Margot swallowed once. A memory flashed news footage on a tiny TV in a diner. An anchor talking about a synthetic opioid. People collapsing after touching a contaminated surface. Fentanyl analog, she said, voice tight. One touch, and you drop. Silas's expression went hard as stone. Victor Moretti was already walking toward that door. 10 feet. 8. Silas's voice was a razor. If Victor touches that handle, he dies. His men will think I did it. Margot's mind snapped into place like a trap closing. Roman, she breathed. Silas's eyes flicked toward Roman again. The smile, the ease, the perfect distance from the danger. Roman isn't meeting the Morettis, Margot said, the words coming faster now. He's setting you up. If Victor dies, they kill you in retaliation. Roman inherits. Silas's mouth tightened with something like grim admiration. Smart boy, he growled. He never had the guts to kill me himself. Victor kept walking. 6 feet. Margot's heart hammered, but her body stayed light, ready. If Silas rushed, the ballroom would erupt. Guns, screams, cameras, war, right here under crystal chandeliers. I can't get there in time, Silas muttered, eyes calculating. Not without a scene. Margot didn't hesitate. Then I will, she said. She broke away from Silas on the last beat of the waltz. She didn't run. Running drew eyes. Instead, she let her heel catch the edge of the parquet floor at the exact moment she passed a server carrying a tray of red wine. She angled her body not toward the server's torso, but toward the tray's center of mass. She felt the weight shift a fraction before impact. Her shoulder clipped the tray. The tray lifted. 5 glasses of Cabernet rose into the air in slow, beautiful horror. Margot twisted her body so the spill arced not toward her dress, but forward toward Victor's path, toward the door handle. Red rain. Victor froze 2 feet from the private room door as wine drenched his white shirt and splattered across his hands. The brass handle took the splash too, the Cabernet washing over it in a messy sheet. "Oh my God!" Margot shrieked, loud enough to slice through the music. "I am so clumsy, I am so sorry." The room fell into a stunned silence. Victor stood dripping red, looking like a murder scene. His bodyguard stepped forward. Silas was there instantly, stepping between Margot and Victor like a wall. "An accident," Silas said, voice steel. "My fiancé has had too much champagne. My apologies." Victor's gaze flicked from his ruined shirt to the door handle now wet, stained, and messy. Then his eyes cut to the waiter, who was trying to melt back toward the kitchen. The waiter's face had gone pale beneath the professional mask. Victor's expression shifted. Not kindness, recognition. "Get me a new shirt," Victor growled to his men. "And bring me that waiter." He leaned closer, his eyes on Silas now. "We sign in the kitchen," Victor said. "Now." Silas let out a breath he didn't want anyone to hear. His hand clamped on Margot's arm too tight, a burst of adrenaline. "You're insane," he whispered, but there was awe threaded through it. Margot smoothed her emerald dress as if nothing had happened. Her heart was a machine gun in her ribs. "I told you," she said, lips barely moving. "I'm clumsy." Silas looked down at her, and something reckless flashed behind his control. Then he kissed her, hard, possessive, desperate. For 3 seconds, the ballroom dissolved into heat and champagne breath and the taste of danger. When he pulled back, his eyes were wide, almost shocked at himself. "That," Silas murmured, voice rough, "was for the cameras." Margot's knees trembled. "Right," she breathed. "For the cameras." They turned toward the service corridor leading to the kitchen. As they moved, Margot caught sight of Roman near the exit. His face had lost its color. He was on his phone, gaze locked on Margot with something cold and promise-heavy, a look that said she had just changed the game, and he intended to make her pay for it. The service corridor swallowed them whole. The ballroom's gold and crystal vanished behind a heavy door, replaced by fluorescent light and the stale smell of dish soap. The floor changed from polished parquet to rubber mats that clung to shoes. Somewhere nearby, an industrial fan hummed steadily, a mechanical breath that made everything feel colder. Margot's pulse still thudded from the kiss, heat and shock tangled together, but the moment didn't get to live. The air back here was sharp and practical. No chandeliers, no music, no illusions. Silas kept his hand at the small of her back, guiding her forward with quiet pressure. His fingers weren't gentle. They weren't rough either. They were certain, like he was moving a piece into position. A pair of double doors swung open ahead. The hotel kitchen was bright enough to be cruel. Stainless steel reflected everything without softening it. Pans hung like weapons. The smell was bleach, hot oil, and the faint sweetness of spilled wine. Victor Moretti stood at a butcher's block that someone had dragged into the center aisle. His shirt had been replaced, but his hands were still stained red, and his eyes held the same ugly patience. Men filled the edges of the room. Moretti security, Mercer security spread out like opposing lines, pretending not to aim. The waiter was there too, pinned between two men. His face was gray. His wrists trembled. On the butcher's block lay a folder and a single sheet of paper, thick and official-looking. A pen waited beside it. Victor didn't look at Margot. He looked at Silas. "We sign," Victor said. Silas gave one short nod. No ceremony, no victory. Margot stayed slightly behind him, eyes moving. She took in the knife rack, the prep sink, the swinging door that led deeper into staff corridors, the distance between men, the way the Mercer guard on the left kept touching his earpiece, as if hearing something he didn't like. Silas leaned a fraction closer to her, voice low. "Stay behind my shoulder," he murmured. "If anything changes, you move to the sinks." Margot's fingers curled around the compact in her clutch. The ceramic blade inside felt like a lie she'd rather not use. Victor opened the folder. The paper inside looked clean, almost innocent. He pressed it flat on the butcher's block. Then he lifted the pen. The waiter made a small sound, half choke, half plea. Victor didn't look at him. Victor signed. Ink scratched across paper. SFX. The nib dragged, slow and final. Silas stepped forward and signed beneath it, his handwriting controlled, sharp angles like knife points. He didn't hesitate. He didn't glance around. When he finished, Victor picked up the document and slipped it back into the folder with deliberate care. He closed it and tapped it once on the butcher's block, squaring the edges. Victor turned to his men and nodded toward the waiter. "Bring him," Victor said. The waiter's eyes widened. His lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Two men seized his arms and hauled him toward the service door. As they passed, Margot caught the waiter's gaze. It wasn't anger. It was terror, so pure it made his pupils look too large. He was already dead. He knew it. The service doors swung shut behind them with a heavy slam. Silence rushed into the space left behind. Only Mercer and Margot remained on one side of the butcher's block. Only stainless steel and harsh light surrounded them. Margot released a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her shoulders loosened, just slightly. "We did it," she whispered, the words barely there. Silas didn't answer. He didn't look relieved. He stared at the service entrance, as if expecting it to open again. His face was paler now, Sweat dampened the edge of his hairline. The sling held his injured arm close, but the way he leaned subtly into the counter told Margot the pain was climbing back in. "Not yet," he said quietly. Margot followed his gaze. Her stomach tightened. The door pushed open. Roman Mercer walked in like he belonged there. He looked immaculate. His tux was perfect. His hair sat in place, as if he'd never moved fast in his life. His smile was back on, bright, easy, practiced. It didn't reach his eyes. "Silas," Roman said warmly, arms spreading as if offering a hug. "I heard about the excitement. Victor's shirt. Tragic." Roman's gaze slid to Margot for a beat and lingered on her face with an intimacy that made her skin crawl. A look that said, "I see you. I remember you." "But the treaty is signed," Roman continued, voice smooth as poured oil. "Father will be pleased." Silas didn't move. His good hand drifted toward his tuxedo jacket, slow enough to look casual. "Drop the act," Silas said. Roman's smile held, but the muscles around his mouth tightened. Silas's eyes were cold. "Steady." The waiter talked. Silas went on. "Before Victor took him." Roman blinked once. Slow, controlled. "We know you paid him to dust the handle," Silas said. "We know you sent the sniper." The room seemed to sharpen. The stainless steel felt brighter. The air felt thinner. Roman's smile vanished so quickly, it looked like it had been wiped off. What replaced it was ugly. Hatred, raw and unpolished. "You were always the favorite," Roman snapped. The warmth gone, voice echoing off tile. Brooding Silas. Brilliant Silas. Father's precious heir. His hands clenched at his sides. "I did everything right," Roman hissed. "I smiled at the donors." Roman stepped closer, eyes blazing, "But he only ever looked at you." Silas's face didn't change. That calm was its own violence. "If the Morettis killed you tonight," Roman went on, voice rising, "I would have been the grieving brother who avenged you. I would have been king." Silas's gaze dropped briefly to Roman's waistband, then back to Roman's eyes. "You would have been a corpse within a week," Silas said. "You don't have the spine for this life." Roman's mouth twisted. "I have enough spine," he spat, "to finish what the sniper started." The words were barely out when Roman's hand moved. He drew a revolver from his waistband, snub-nosed, black, close-range ugly, and leveled it at Silas's chest. Margot's breath stopped. Silas was injured. His sling pinned one arm. His other hand was inside his jacket, but not fast enough. Not against someone already aimed. The kitchen's fluorescent light reflected in the revolver barrel. A cold circle of certainty. Roman's finger tightened on the trigger. Margot didn't think. She didn't calculate. She moved. Her body pivoted toward the dish pit where stacks of heavy ceramic charger plates sat drying. Her hands had carried too many trays, too many overloaded plates, too many nights of balancing weight while smiling. Her shoulders knew how to throw weight forward and let go. She grabbed the top plate. It was thick, heavy, smooth, cold, from rinsing water. Her fingers found the edge like it was familiar. Roman's eyes flicked to her for the first time, surprise flashing. Margot's voice tore out of her like a reflex from 1,000 shifts. "Order up." She hurled the plate with everything she had. The ceramic flew flat, spinning through the air like a brutal coin. It smashed into Roman's hand. Roman screamed. The revolver fired wild bang into the ceiling, blasting plaster dust down like gray snow. The gun clattered to the tile. Silas moved. One stride. Two. He closed the distance with violent precision and drove his fist into Roman's jaw. Roman collapsed before he hit the floor, his body folding into the tile with a final, helpless sound. Silas kicked the revolver away. sending it skittering under a prep table. Margot stood frozen, chest heaving, fingers still tingling from the throw, her mind caught up in jagged pieces, gun, scream, ceiling dust, blood on tile. Silas turned toward her. For a second, his face wasn't cold. It wasn't controlled. It was shock, and something like awe. "You!" Silas breathed, his voice strained as pain pulled at him. His good hand pressed instinctively to his shoulder, as if remembering it existed. You threw a plate at him. Margot's knees felt weak. Her throat was dry. She stared at Roman's unconscious body, at the cracked plate shards on the floor, at the red smear beginning to bloom across the tile from Roman's broken hand. Then she looked at Silas. Her voice shook, but it didn't break. "I told you," she said. "I'm a waitress." Her fingers flexed once, still feeling the weight of the plate leaving her hand. "We have good aim." For a beat, the kitchen didn't know what to do with the silence. The industrial fan kept humming. A faucet dripped somewhere, steady as a metronome. Plaster dust floated down in slow spirals, settling onto stainless steel and Roman's black tux like ash after a fire. Silas stood over his brother, chest rising and falling in controlled bursts. His jaw was tight, the muscle flicking as if he wanted to grind the moment into powder. The sling held his injured arm close, but the rest of him was coiled, ready for the next threat. Margot couldn't stop looking at Roman's hand. The angle was wrong. Blood pooled beneath his fingers, darkening the tile in a spreading stain. A shard of ceramic glinted near his cuff. Silas's head lifted. His eyes snapped to the service entrance. "Move!" he said, voice low and sharp. Margot didn't ask where. Her legs obeyed before her brain caught up. She backed toward the sinks, keeping the butcher's block between herself and the doorway. Her clutch still held the compact, the blade inside pressing cold against her palm. The service doors burst open. Mercer security flooded in first black suits, earpieces, hands already half raised. Moretti men followed a half step behind, their faces hard, their eyes scanning for betrayal. The kitchen filled with bodies and tension, the air tightening like a pulled wire. Elias Mercer appeared in the doorway last, flanked by two guards. He looked smaller than the room made him, but his gaze made the space feel like it belonged to him. His wheelchair's motor whirred softly as he rolled in, the sound calm and mechanical, like inevitability. His eyes landed on Roman, then on the blood, then on Silas. He didn't ask questions first. He didn't show shock. He simply absorbed the scene the way powerful people absorbed disasters quietly, immediately deciding what it meant for them. "What happened?" Elias asked, voice rough as gravel. Roman groaned, a weak sound, and tried to move. His good hand twitched against the tile. Silas didn't look down at him. "He drew on me," Silas said. He confessed. "Sniper. Poison. Everything." Roman's head rolled slightly, and his eyes fluttered open. They were unfocused, but the hatred in them was clear. "He's lying," Roman rasped, spitting blood. Silas cut him off without raising his voice. "He wanted me dead in the ballroom. He wanted me dead in the loft. He wanted Victor dead on that door handle." Elias's gaze slid to Roman's face. The old man didn't blink. Roman's mouth pulled into a grim smile, broken and bitter. "So what?" Roman breathed, voice shaking with rage. "You were always the chosen one. Always." Elias's eyes narrowed, not with sympathy, but with assessment, like he was looking at a tool that had finally snapped. "Enough," Elias said. The word dropped heavy. Roman tried to push himself up. His broken hand dragged through blood, leaving a smear across the tile. Elias didn't move closer. He didn't offer help. He looked at Roman the way one looked at a disease. "Secure him," Elias ordered. Two guards stepped forward and pinned Roman with efficient force. Roman struggled weakly, pain making him gasp. Roman's eyes darted toward Margot. The look was pure poison. Elias followed that gaze and finally let his attention land fully on Margot. He studied her for a moment, emerald dress out of place in bleach-white light, damp hairline from sweat, eyes wide but steady. The smallest flicker of amusement touched his mouth. "That," Elias said, nodding once toward the shattered ceramic on the floor, "was not what I expected from an art restoration expert." Margot's throat tightened. She forced herself not to swallow too obviously. Silas's eyes flicked to her, quick and sharp, as if warning her to choose her next breath carefully. Margot kept her posture straight. "It was instinct," she said, voice controlled. "He aimed. I reacted." Elias's gaze held her for a long beat. Then he turned away like the verdict had been written. "Good," Elias said simply. "Instinct is harder to teach than loyalty." Roman made a choked sound, half laugh, half sob. "You're going to let her—" Roman spit, trying to twist against the guards. "You're going to let a waitress—" Silas stepped closer until Roman's words died behind clenched teeth. He crouched slightly, just enough to bring his face into Roman's line of sight. Silas's voice was low, calm, lethal. "You lost," he said. "And you lost because you couldn't stop reaching." Roman's eyes burned with humiliation. Silas stood again, straightening with a faint wince as pain tugged at his shoulder. He didn't show it beyond that. Elias's gaze moved to the butcher's block, where the signed folder still sat, edges squared. The paper inside looked innocent, but Margot knew what it represented. Blood postponed, not erased. Elias lifted a hand. "Bring me the footage," he said. A security chief stepped forward with a tablet already lit. The screen's glow cut through the kitchen's harsh light. Margot watched the tablet from the corner of her eye. On screen, the ballroom corridor appeared timestamp in the top corner. Crisp and undeniable. 11:47 p.m. The waiter's gloved hand moved toward the private room door handle. The gray object touched brass. Pale dust clung in a thin smear. The image was steady, clear, not a rumor. Elias's eyes didn't blink as he watched. Silas leaned slightly toward the screen, his expression unreadable. The video cut to another angle, the waiter turning. A brief exchange in the corridor. Roman's face entering frame just a second, leaning close. Mouth moving. A hand passing something small. A folded stack. Money. Roman's breath hitched. Elias paused the video with a single tap. The frame held Roman's face in perfect clarity. His smile, too perfect. His eyes, too hungry. Elias looked up. "Chain," he said. The security chief responded immediately, voice crisp. "Hotel camera system, copied at 11:52 p.m. to a sealed drive. Signed by me. Witnessed by Mercer Security and Hotel Management." He produced a small evidence pouch from a case. A USB drive sat inside, sealed with a red strip and a printed label. He placed it on the butcher's block. Then he pulled out a receipt, stamped and signed. Margot saw the details without meaning to. Time, date, signature. The ink was fresh. The stamp looked wet, like the truth had been pressed into paper. Elias nodded once. Roman's face twisted in panic. "You can't," Roman rasped. Elias's gaze cut to him like a blade. "I can," Elias said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Elias looked at Silas. "The truce stands," he said. "Because you have proof it wasn't you." Silas's jaw unclenched slightly, but his eyes stayed cold. Elias's gaze drifted to Margot again, brief and assessing. "And because you," Elias said, "kept Victor alive long enough to sign." Margot's chest tightened. The compliment felt like a weapon, useful, conditional. Elias gestured toward Roman. "Take him," Elias ordered. The guards hauled Roman upright. He winced, blood dripping from his broken hand onto the floor in a slow trail. His shoes squeaked on tile. As Roman was pulled toward the service exit, he twisted his head just enough to lock eyes with Margot one last time. The promise in that stare was ugly and absolute. Then the doors swung shut behind him. The kitchen exhaled. Silas leaned back against a prep counter, his face paler now that adrenaline was draining away. His breathing was controlled, but his shoulders sagged by a fraction. Margot's knees threatened to buckle. She gripped the edge of the sink, cold steel anchoring her. Elias rolled closer, stopping in front of Silas. The old man's eyes softened by exactly 0 degrees. "You nearly let him kill you," Elias said. Silas's mouth twitched, humorless. "I didn't," he replied. Elias's gaze flicked to Margot. "No," Elias corrected. "She didn't." Silas's eyes shifted to Margot, something unreadable passing between them. Gratitude wasn't the right word. Respect, maybe. Recognition. Elias turned his wheelchair slightly, already moving on, already calculating the next board position. "Get out of this kitchen," he ordered. "Clean up." Quietly, his eyes narrowed at Silas. "And if you still want a rat," Elias added, voice low, "you have one less. But you're not finished." Margot's hand tightened around the compact mirror in her clutch until the edge bit into her palm. She understood, with a cold clarity, that tonight wasn't the end. It was the proof of what she was capable of, and proof always came with a price. The days after the gala did not feel like victory. They felt like containment. Everything important happened in quiet rooms with locked doors. Paperwork replaced gunfire. Signatures did more damage than bullets ever could. The Mercer estate ran like a machine that had been forced to reveal its gears, and now everyone moved carefully around the exposed metal. Margot stayed in the guest wing, but the house no longer treated her like a visitor. Staff stopped asking if she needed anything and started informing her of what was scheduled. Breakfast appeared at the same time each morning, plated with surgical precision. Security positions shifted when she walked the halls, subtle as choreography. A guard she hadn't seen before started standing near the staircase at night, pretending to stare at a painting while his eyes tracked the corridor. Silas vanished into meetings. When he did appear, he looked older around the eyes, the kind of exhaustion that came from being awake even when you slept. His shoulder healed in slow, stubborn stages. Fresh bandages, smaller bandages. Finally, the sling gone, leaving only a stiffness in his movement when he thought no one was watching. Margot tried not to watch. She failed. One afternoon, Henri arrived at the estate with a folder tucked under his arm like contraband. He looked like he'd stepped out of another world restaurant. Shoes, slightly too tight suit, the smell of coffee clinging to him. His hands shook until he saw Margot, and then he forced them still. "I was told to give this to you," he said, voice thin. Inside the folder was a stamped receipt and a bank statement printout, the ink still crisp. The deposit number made Margot's breath catch. Not a gift, not a guess, an exact amount, formatted like something that had already been approved. Toby's name appeared in black type, facility transfer authorization, intake appointment, a caseworker signature, a court date moved forward. SFX. Paper edges rasping as Margot turned the pages. For a moment, She couldn't speak. Her throat tightened as if her body didn't trust the reality. Henri's eyes flicked around the hallway, nervous even here. "They're moving fast," he whispered. "Too fast for normal people." Margot looked down at the documents again. The date stamps were real. The signatures looked like they belonged to people who were used to signing away someone else's future. "This is done," she managed. Henri nodded once, then retreated as quickly as he'd come, as if proximity to Mercer business could burn. That night, Silas found Margot in the library, one of the smaller ones, not Elias's, where the books smelled less like cigar smoke and more like dust and time. She was sitting on a leather chair with the folder on her lap, staring at Toby's name like it might evaporate. Silas stopped in the doorway. The light from the lamp cut his face into sharp planes. "They filed the motion," he said, voice low. "The judge will sign." Margot's fingers tightened on the paper. "You said one phone call," she replied. "This looks like an avalanche." Silas moved into the room and closed the door behind him. "SFX." The latch clicked softly. "It's easier to move a system when you already own half of it," he said, flat. Margot hated how casual he made it sound. She hated that it was true. She lifted her eyes. "And what does it cost you?" Silas's mouth twitched. Not a smile. Something like a recognition of the game she was finally learning to name. "It costs me nothing I can't afford," he said. "It costs you 6 months." Margot's grip on the folder tightened until the paper bent. Silas stepped closer, stopping just far enough away that he wasn't crowding her, but close enough that the air felt different. "They'll finalize the transfer by Monday," he said. "Your brother will be out of state custody." Margot's chest ached, the kind of ache that came when hope was too heavy to carry. "And Roman?" she asked, forcing the words out. "What happens to him?" Silas's gaze went colder. "He'll be alive," Silas said, "because father prefers consequences that last." Margot swallowed. That answer was a warning, disguised as reassurance. She looked down again at Toby's name, the date stamp, the signature, proof that the world could change quickly when the right people wanted it to. Silas watched her absorb it, his eyes sharp and quiet. "You're thinking about running," he said. Margot's jaw clenched. "Wouldn't you?" Silas didn't deny it. "If you run," he said, "you run alone. And you'll always be looking over your shoulder." Margot's fingernails pressed into the folder. "And if I stay?" she asked, voice steady but thin. "I live in your world." Silas's gaze didn't flinch. "You already do," he replied. The next morning, a black SUV took her to a small courthouse in the city. Not the front steps with cameras, a side entrance, a hallway that smelled like old carpet and bleach. A clerk behind glass stamped papers without looking up. "SFX. Stamp thud. Stamp thud. Stamp thud." Each one a small, violent certainty. Margot stood beside Silas and watched signatures become reality. An attorney slid documents across a table. "Chain confirmed," he said briskly, pointing at a line of initials and times. "Copy received at 11:52. Seal intact. Witnessed by hotel management and Mercer security." A sealed evidence pouch sat on the table, red strip unbroken. The same kind of plastic certainty Margot had seen in the kitchen, now translated into legal language. Silas signed once. The pen didn't tremble. Margot watched the clerk stamp the final page, and something inside her shifted. Not gratitude, not relief. Power, understood for the first time as a mechanism cold, procedural, absolute. 2 days later, she saw Toby, not behind a scratched plexiglass window, not across a table bolted to a floor, in a bright office with soft chairs and a bowl of candy on the desk. A social worker spoke gently, using words that didn't sound like accusations. Toby entered with a staff member's hand lightly on his shoulder. He looked smaller than she remembered. Or maybe she was seeing him without the distortion of fluorescent prison lighting for the first time. His eyes found her and widened. "Mags," he said, voice breaking on the name. Margot stood so fast her chair scraped. She crossed the room in 3 steps and wrapped her arms around him. He smelled like clean laundry and cheap shampoo. The scent punched air into her lungs like oxygen after drowning. Toby clung to her like he was afraid she would disappear. "I thought I did something bad," he whispered into her shoulder. Margot's throat closed. She blinked hard, refusing to cry in front of him. "You didn't," she said, voice steady by force. "You didn't." When she pulled back, Toby's gaze flicked past her. He noticed Silas standing near the doorway, silent, hands in pockets, posture controlled. Silas looked out of place in this room of soft lighting and gentle voices, like a blade laid on a pillow. Toby stared for a long beat. "Is he with you?" Toby asked cautiously. Margot felt her mouth go dry. The contract sat heavy in her mind, 6 months written in invisible ink across her skin. She chose her words carefully. "He helped," she said. Toby nodded slowly, accepting it in the simple way he accepted most things. With trust first, questions later. As they walked out of the building, the city air hit Margot's face cold, real, smelling like exhaust and winter. Silas fell into step beside her. "You got what you wanted," he said. Margot held Toby's hand tighter. "I got what I needed," she corrected. Silas' gaze slid to her, sharp. "What's the difference?" Margot didn't answer immediately. She watched Toby's breath puff white in the air. She watched his shoulders relax with every step away from locked doors. Then she looked at Silas. "The difference," she said quietly, "is what it turns you into." Silas didn't reply. But for the first time, he didn't look at her like a curiosity. He looked at her like a factor. And Margot understood, with a clarity that made her stomach tighten. Roman wasn't the only one who had tried to claim power through her. The difference was that Roman had overreached, Silas had negotiated, and now, so would she. 6 months later, the obsidian room sounded different. Silverware clinked with the casual rhythm of people who believed they were safe. Conversation rose and fell in warm waves. A glass laughed against another glass. The air still carried leather and truffle, but the fear that used to sit underneath it had thinned, diluted by time and the quiet disappearance of certain men. Table 9 was set like it always was, linen pressed, stemware aligned, a single candle burning steady in a thick glass holder. The flame didn't flicker, even when the doors opened. The room no longer held its breath. Margot sat in the chair that used to feel forbidden. No apron, no order pad, just a soft cream sweater, jeans, and her hands resting on the table like they belonged there. The scars on her knuckles had faded into pale lines. She still felt them sometimes when she gripped a glass too tightly, as if her skin remembered the night it learned what pressure meant. Across from her, Toby studied the menu with the seriousness of someone reading a treasure map. His face looked fuller now, cleaner, rested. His laugh came easier, like a muscle finally allowed to relax. "I want the burger," Toby declared, tapping the page with a fingertip. SFX, paper rasping softly. "Get the burger," Margot said. "Get 2. Toby grinned, satisfied, and folded the menu with both hands as if closing a deal. Margot watched him for a moment longer than she meant to. Every normal gesture still felt miraculous. The bell above the heavy oak doors chimed. Heads turned out of habit, not fear. A few people looked away again, immediately, returning to their wine, their gossip, their dates. The room did not go quiet. Silas Mercer walked in alone. No bodyguards, no scanning eyes at the bar, no vacuum of silence. He wore a dark coat, simple by his standards, and the winter air followed him in for a second, before the door shut behind him. His hair was swept back. A touch of rain still caught in it. His jaw carried a faint scar that hadn't been there before the kitchen night, written into skin. He crossed the room as if it belonged to him, and yet, oddly, as if he didn't need it to. When he reached table 9, he paused. Margot felt Toby's gaze shift beside her, curious, cautious. Toby's shoulders tensed, then loosened when Margot's hand rested lightly on his forearm, an unspoken signal. Safe. Silas looked at the empty chair beside Margot, not the one across from her. "Is this seat taken?" he asked. Margot leaned back slightly. Her expression stayed neutral, but her eyes didn't soften. "Depends," she said. "Are you going to tip?" For a second, Silas looked genuinely caught off guard. Then a sound left him short, warm, real, a laugh, not dry, not amused at someone's expense, just human. A couple at a nearby table glanced over, startled by the sound as if they'd heard a ghost speak kindly. Silas pulled out the chair and sat down next to Margot, not across. He didn't try to touch her. He didn't claim her with a hand on her knee. He simply sat as if that choice mattered. His eyes flicked to Toby. "Toby," Silas said, voice calm. Toby blinked. "Hi," he answered carefully, then looked at Margot as if confirming the script. Margot nodded once. Silas's gaze returned to Margot. The room's candlelight caught in his eyes, making them look less like ice and more like deep water. "The contract is up today," Silas said softly. Margot's chest tightened despite herself. The words sounded clean, legal, final. 6 months, Silas continued. "Your debts are paid. Toby is secure. The money is in your account." He didn't say it like a boast. He said it like a ledger closing. "You're free to go," he finished. "Paris. Anywhere. You never have to see me again." Toby's fingers curled around the edge of his folded menu. Margot noticed and covered his hand briefly with her own, grounding him. Margot looked at Silas for a long moment. She saw the controlled posture, the scar, the faint stiffness in his shoulder when he shifted, as if his body still remembered what it cost to keep living. She saw the man who had negotiated her life like a contract, and the man who had, in his own cold way, honored it. "I could go to Paris," Margot said, voice even. Silas's eyebrows lifted slightly. Waiting. Margot's mouth curved, small and sharp. "But the coffee there is overrated." Silas's gaze held hers, and the corner of his mouth twitched, almost a smile. "Is that so?" he murmured. Margot's foot found his under the table, not playful, deliberate, a reminder that she was choosing, not being chosen. "I realize something," she said. "I'm not good at taking orders anymore." Silas leaned back a fraction, studying her as if recalculating. "And you'd rather give them. It's a negotiation," Margot replied. "I stay, but not as an employee, and not as a fake fiancé." Silas's eyes darkened slightly. "Not with possession, but with interest." "Then as what?" he asked. Margot didn't answer right away. She watched a server pass by with a water pitcher, crystal catching the light. The motion sparked a memory tap on linen, glass on table, humiliation disguised as routine. The server moved on. Margot reached for the water glass in front of her. It was empty, Silas noticed. He didn't signal anyone. He didn't tap the table. He reached for the pitcher himself. The crystal was cold in his hand. The candlelight fractured through it, making the water inside look like cut glass. Toby stared openly now, fascinated. Silas tipped the pitcher and poured into Margot's glass. No splash, no command, no dismissal, just a controlled stream filling the empty space. He set the pitcher down gently. The base touched linen without a clatter. Margot's throat tightened in a way she didn't expect. The gesture was small, but it landed heavy, an inversion of everything that had started this. Silas looked at her over the rim of the filled glass. "Partner," Margot said finally. Silas's gaze sharpened. "That's a dangerous word." Margot leaned in just enough that her voice stayed private. "I'm the only person in this city who doesn't look away from you," she said. "And I'm tired of being rented." Silas's eyes held hers. The room's noise faded at the edges, not because it went silent, but because Margot stopped hearing anything else. Silas's voice dropped. "What do you want?" Margot smiled. Not sweet. "Certain truth," she said. "And terms." Silas nodded once, almost imperceptible. "Name them." Margot's fingers closed around the full water glass. Cold condensation dampened her skin. "First," she said, "Toby stays untouched. Always. No leverage. No business." Silas's jaw tightened. "Agreed." "Second," Margot continued, "I don't disappear when you're done. I build something. My name on it." Silas's eyes flicked, assessing. "Agreed." "Third," Margot said, voice steady, "if you ever tap a table at me again, I walk." Silas's mouth twitched, the ghost of amusement returning. "Agreed," he said. Margot set the glass down. Silas studied her like he was seeing her clearly for the first time. Not as an accident, not as a cover, but as someone who could rewrite the contract. Margot reached up and caught his tie, not yanking it like a trophy, just pulling him close enough to make the intention unmistakable. Silas's breath hitched. Subtle, controlled. "This isn't for cameras," Margot said. Silas's gaze dropped to her mouth, then lifted back to her eyes. "I know," he murmured. He kissed her, not hard, not desperate, clean, certain. A choice made without an audience. Across the table, Toby's eyes widened. Then he broke into a grin like he'd just watched his favorite movie end the right way. Around them, people noticed. A pause here, a glance there, but no one turned away. No one pretended not to see. The obsidian room kept breathing, and at table 9, for the first time, Margot didn't feel like she was surviving. She felt like she was deciding. No one looked away.